We would not like to take more time off this webinar, and I would first like to introduce our very first keynote speaker for today, and I'm very excited for him to be sharing with us. He is the head of new product development in Cambridge, working on applying digital technologies to English language teaching and learning. So his team is currently working on a range of new products to transform learning assessment, and he has reached approximately 6 million learners a year. So I believe that he'll be able to offer a lot of insights in this topic, and we are extremely fortunate to have him. So without further ado, let us all welcome together Mr. Andrew Nye.
Hi, thank you so much, Jason. Good afternoon to all of you. It's the morning here in Cambridge, a very wet and rainy morning, but it's a great honor to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you and to speak to you. We're going to start actually with a couple of polls before I share my screen. I think Jason or Jenny, could you bring up the first poll? Thank you very much. So the first question that I have for you is this: what do tools and technology in education need to focus on in the next 10 years? So could you choose which of these you think is the most important to focus on? Do we need to focus on providing greater digital access around the world? Do we need to focus on creating new types of content? Or do we need to focus on creating new tools for teachers and learners? Or actually, do we need to focus on improving better use of the tools we've already got? Or maybe you think it's none of those, in which case, if you choose other, please write what you think is the most important thing in the chat. So please do that now. I can see lots of you are doing it. I'll just give you another few seconds. Okay, brilliant. I think everybody has answered. So I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. And so really interesting, there's a standout winner, which is around digital literacy and improving better use of the tools we've already got, which I think is really interesting that you've all said, well, 48% of you have said that. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to stop showing that. And then the second question I have for you, if we could bring that up. Thank you very much. So this question is, what skills will have most impact in the world of work in the next 10 years? So do you think it's specific technical skills that will be most important, like data science? Do you think it's skills which are transferable, like communication skills, problem solving? Do you think it's about attitudes that people have around positive mindset, that kind of thing, or something else? Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds to answer. I'm going to end the poll now. Again, really interesting. About 50% again have selected one of the answers. This time it's transferable skills. So not specific technical ones, but skills which are transferable from one job to another, which I think is really interesting as well. So those are the results. Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking part in that. We'll come back to that later. I'm going to stop sharing the poll results, and I am going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see those slides. So Jason, if you can't see that, just let me know, but I'm assuming everybody can. So there's a lot I want to get through in the 20 minutes I've got. So let's get going straight away. And before we get specifically into educational technology and what impact it is or isn't having, I think it's helpful to look beyond that and look at some of the global trends which are happening nowadays, and specifically ones which are bringing about the greatest changes in how we live. So the sorts of trends which I am talking about are these kinds of ones which we're all familiar with. So Black Lives Matter, racial justice and social justice campaigns, climate disasters and climate change protests, and of course, the COVID pandemic. And in a lot of these, we see young people who are restless for change. And education is at an interesting point right now. In many ways, the educational system is stuck in an old world that refuses to die and a new world that refuses to be born. And we know the arguments which are leveled against the existing educational model and system. Basically, it's an industrial model that comes from a bygone age, from a time in the past when the purpose of education needed to be something different. And then depending on who you talk to, we're either now in a knowledge economy or we're about to enter the fourth industrial revolution, which makes us ask some fundamental questions about what we're preparing students for now. And at the top of this iceberg model, we can see that we're preparing students into jobs for particular skills they have, but these skills will become obsolete at some point in the future, because a lot of jobs will become obsolete because of the pace of change in the world now. So arguably just as important, and this is what the poll results that we just did represented, just as important as skills, or more important, are the less obvious things beneath the surface in this iceberg model, like enablers, which is what enable people to progress in their job and in their career beyond the actual skills that they have. And then they'll need to be able to adapt, to relearn and to unlearn things. And the right mindset is what will help them do that. And then a sense of identity will be how they understand their purpose in the world of work. And so I think there's an interesting question about the extent to which our education systems are addressing these things. And there seems to be a mismatch now between the prevailing model of education on the one hand and the world outside schools. And this has led to a number of issues that we see a lot, these being a few of them. So firstly, learners sometimes being disengaged in school because it doesn't connect with what's important to them, like some of those global trends that I mentioned at the start. Secondly, a system which isn't designed always for mental well-being, and this causes a lot of stress and anxiety in children that we've seen particularly throughout the pandemic. A curriculum that needs to properly address issues of diversity and inclusion. And then finally, we're seeing the emergence of a creator economy, it's sometimes called, where you can build your own community and you can monetize that. And we need to encourage learners to be an active part of this and to be content creators, not just content consumers. And there is a hope that technology would create greater engagement in education at all levels, but it hasn't really delivered, and we're a long way from fulfilling the potential of educational technology. And so the question obviously is, why is that? And my perspective on this comes from a lot of the work that we've been doing in the new product development team in Cambridge, and from something we've been running called Shape Education. And Shape is a program of events to get different perspectives and deeper insights on the future of education. And it does that by connecting people across sectors. So bringing together people like policymakers, heads of schools, technologists, assessment experts, learners themselves, and so on. And then to accelerate positive change through that cross-sector collaboration. And we ran a recent SHAPE event on the future of schools. And at that event, Mario Borosovic from a company called Emerge Education said that when it comes to actual learning, he thinks that we're still in the stone age of EdTech. And there was an interesting discussion around that. And these are some of the key points that came out of that discussion and that we've identified from elsewhere. So firstly, we've used technology essentially to digitize textbooks and to put PDFs on screen. And in doing that, we have in our mind a particular template for education, which means that essentially we've digitized traditional practice, but we haven't really improved, and we certainly haven't transformed learning and pedagogy. The second point is that we need to spend a lot more time understanding how learners engage with technology and how we can develop solutions that fit better into their lives and that match the sorts of things that they use in the rest of their lives outside school. And I think the third point is that we need to seriously question how enjoyable and how engaging the learning journey is for students in schools when a learning management system is at the heart of it. Are we overlooking this element of enjoyment and engagement with too much of a focus on the outcome, on the grades and the assessment? The fourth point is whether the technology is generally user-friendly or user-friendly enough. Have we developed a range of solutions, all with their own dashboards, that collectively don't really talk to each other and are just too confusing for teachers? And so we need to think more about designing with interoperability in mind so that all the solutions speak to each other and connect. The fifth point is that if we want to use technology to transform learning, then pedagogy cannot be considered an afterthought. EdTech teams that are developing solutions need pedagogy experts in them. And then the sixth point is that we need EdTech to be evidence-informed and robust. That's absolutely crucial, but we also need it to be agile and innovative. We need to know that EdTech solutions work, but are we overcomplicating how we think about and measure impact? How can we get greater insight more quickly? And then in addition to these 6 points, probably the most important, but possibly the least concrete point is around thinking with different mindsets and models. If we try and understand emerging technologies through the lens of concepts that we're familiar with, then this sometimes leads to us missing the point of those new technologies. So we need to break down the paradigms of how we've been taught to think about education in terms of the classroom, the role of the teacher, and so on. And this model that some of you may have seen before, the Samir model, gets to the heart of the 7 points I just went through. A lot of the ways in which we're using technology are in the substitution and the augmentation phases, which, as you see on the right of the model, is enhancing what we already do. Where we want to get to is transformation, which is the top 2 levels, modification and redefinition. So what can we do about all of that? Well, firstly, we constantly hear the technology is not ready, the students aren't ready, the teachers aren't ready, but there are millions of students who are online doing really interesting things with technology, but they're just not necessarily choosing to do them through the learning management systems within schools. So there's a key challenge that comes with this, which is making what students do in their English studies more like what they choose to do in their everyday lives outside their English study. And in the new product development team in Cambridge, we've been experimenting with different ways to do that. And one hypothesis that we have been testing is through a strand of work around games-based learning and assessment. We know that games offer a wide range of benefits that are well suited to education, such as challenge, progression, reward, and access to personalized experiences. And our hypothesis is that we can add English language practice into the Minecraft world. And we've been working with Microsoft to co-create a product with them to test that hypothesis. And what we're seeing so far in this pilot that we've launched is significant engagement. We're seeing that students, they want to take ownership. They want to collaborate and to build things together in the Minecraft world. They don't just want to play the game, but they want to play with it. They kind of want to become part of it. The second thing that I think we can do about this is to think about a different model when we think about education. I mentioned learning management systems earlier. They're quite a monolithic concept, and they tend to represent a particular view of education, which is that it happens in a school with a teacher standing in front of a class, controlling how learners interact with the LMS. And that's a fairly top-down view of education, where the motivation that students have to do the work they're given tends to be extrinsic motivation. They're basically doing it because the teacher has told them to. A more future-focused view would be more bottom-up, with students learning from each other, enabled and empowered through technology, which would hopefully provide much greater intrinsic motivation. And that's certainly what we're seeing in the Minecraft example that I mentioned. In some contexts, we are seeing technology being combined with new approaches to teaching, which are starting to change the environments where they're being implemented. And I mean, for example, approaches like the flipped classroom, which optimizes time in class by spending it meeting the needs of individual students or developing collaborative projects, or for example, project-based learning, which enables students to acquire key knowledge and skills through the development of projects that respond to real life problems. And we can teach the students the skills they need to access information, to evaluate it, to synthesize it, to integrate it with other information, to solve problems and complete tasks. And I know Alan talked yesterday about the Cambridge Life Competencies framework, which sets out a lot of these skills. And we're using those skills and competencies in some of the materials that we're producing in the new product development team and elsewhere in Cambridge, like Cahoots for Work, which is the example here, which is aimed at making learners more effective with their English in the workplace. And then thirdly, the third thing we can do about this is that there is sometimes a false dichotomy between technology and pedagogy. And all the approaches that I'm talking about need to be led by pedagogy, which technology then supports in a meaningful way. And a key point I'm making is that there is a lot of technology out there, a lot of devices, a lot of equipment that's being used, but it will all lead to very little without the teachers, the educational leaders, the parents, and so on, with a vision for how to use it in a really transformational way. And so we need to define the future that we want. Do we want robots teaching our children? Probably not. If we can have a clearer sense of what we want from a pedagogic and learning point of view, then it will be more within our control, and we won't be blindly swept along by technology that doesn't deliver the impacts that we want. And then finally, the fourth thing that we can do to work to create this future is to work in cross-functional teams. So initiatives like Shape Education that I mentioned earlier start from the premise that innovation happens best and problems are solved best with EdTech people working with designers, with teachers, with learners, and so on, right from the start. But that's not how the education system typically works. Jeff Stead, who used to work with us in Cambridge and is now Chief Product Officer at Babbel, describes what we currently have as something a bit like one of those cowboy films where everyone is pointing a gun at everybody else and no one moves. And without really realizing it, all these players in the system are holding each other back from being able to innovate, and they're all accidentally blaming each other. So the schools want to innovate, but they say that the way assessment works prevents that. The publishers, maybe they want to innovate, but they say that the ministry won't let them because the ministry want something like last year's books, and so on and so on and so on, and very little changes. And the system is, in a sense, optimized for the status quo, and that makes change quite difficult for the people who are a core part of it. And so you end up with this kind of standoff that we can see in the image. And that's why in education, we tend to see innovation happening around the edges of the system. But what we really need is for people to put their metaphorical guns down and to work together in cross-functional teams so that we can create innovation at the center of the system as well as on the edges of it. Technology will never properly work in learning in education unless teachers and the teaching profession are part of the design of the tools and ideally are central to that design. And that's my big request to everyone here, is to get teachers involved from the start, wherever and whenever it's possible to do that. So thank you very much for listening. I know I went through all of that quite quickly, but hopefully there'll be time to discuss some of it later. My email address is there at the bottom of the screen, so please do get in touch if you want to talk about anything. Thank you very much.